with control, they begin with connection, with belonging, with answers to questions people are desperate to have answered. And before you even realize it, loyalty becomes identity and questioning becomes betrayal. It doesn't happen overnight. It's subtle, it's strategic, and it's deeply human. But here's the question. Could it be happening today, right in front of us? Tonight, we're diving into the psychology of belief, influence, and why people follow, no matter what. Joining me is Dr. Adam Kunz as we break down how people get pulled in, why they stay, and what it really takes to break free. And trust me, some of what you're about to hear might hit closer to home than you expect. I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Please welcome to the Truth Be Told studios, for the first time, Dr. Adam Kunz. Hello, hello.
Hello. How are you, Tony?
I'm good. And first of all, for those out there and to you, happy Easter and Good Friday and Passover and all that good stuff. So
likewise, whatever your denomination is, have a good weekend.
Yes. If you don't even celebrate anything, just go celebrate and have a nice picnic or something.
There's no excuse that you need to go bake a ham, right?
And also, I want to make sure I'm saying your last name right.
Sure. It's Kunz. Yep. Pronounced Kunz.
Perfect. Thank you. I did that all on my own, so thank you.
Good. Nice. A good German name.
Right. Well, you know, I've been on this kind of a theme lately about I've been watching a lot of old historical movies with religion and cults, with documentaries, and it kind of really reminds me of a lot of what's going on nowadays. And so I asked people, what if I told you that you don't just join a cult, you just don't wake up and go, I want to join one, but you slowly become part of one. You kind of slowly get indoctrinated into it, and without even realizing it. And I think between, news media and news outlets and social media, I think it's kind of, I feel what's happening. What is your thoughts on how we're seeing cults kind of on the rise again, or already here?
I think so. Your intuitions are absolutely right. I think that a person doesn't wake up one morning and say, I'm going to go join a cult. Right. The chances of that happening, I think, are pretty slim. And if you do that, you're probably doing it to found a cult or for some nefarious purpose. Right. But it's true that I think people don't realize until it's too late that they're in a cult. And I think part of that has to do with the lack of definition around the word and some of the amorphous concepts that are associated with it. I do think that you're right, that our particular moment, I had an interview earlier today with another publication where we were actually talking about AI and technology and so forth. And so it's been on my mind all day. But I think we're in a particularly vulnerable moment right now for a host of reasons. One is that social media and the algorithmic technology that we've all been used to for the last 15 years is designed to keep us engaged and to keep delivering the product. And then when you add on top of that things like AI and deep fakes, it can be very easy to start falling victim to disinformation without even knowing that you're falling victim to disinformation. So the costs of the beneficial technologies that we get, they are oftentimes, we find ourselves in a situation where I didn't see myself here, and it spread. Now, the thing is you echo back to the history. At the end of the day, and this is a theme that I hope we'll talk about tonight, but at the end of the day, the reason why I'm interested in cults is that cult behavior is just totalitarianism on a small scale. So what we're talking about is the political nature of power and how people can wield power over a person in a totalitarian way. And so in that sense, this is as old as human history. Right. So while we may be particularly vulnerable, we're not really experiencing anything new in many ways.
Yeah, I know a lot of it goes back to the belief system. And so belief system kind of, I think that's where we start crossing the line from passion into control. Can you talk about that a little bit? Where is that line?
Absolutely. I think now would be a good time to talk about when I use the word cult as a scholar, it's very different from the way maybe you might hear it at the Thanksgiving table or hear someone use it online. Usually, what people mean when they say the word cult in just the common everyday language, they usually just mean that's a weird group of people and I don't like them, right? And that's the nature of English. We don't always have a word for everything. But when scholars are applying the word cult or high control group or high demand religion, whatever word you want to use, what we're really meaning is we're looking for four things. We're looking for charismatic leadership, which we can explore tonight. And as you mentioned too, second, the transcendent belief system. But then systems of control and systems of influence are the things that are married to those two authoritative things. But you're right. I think so. One piece of this, what makes a cult, is a belief system. That second factor is crucial. You have to have some type of transcendent belief system. That can either be something that already exists and you just repackage it, like Christianity or Islam or something like that. But it can also be something new. It could be a nutrition guide. It could be a guide to financial success. It could be any truth that basically you think you've discovered as a charismatic leader and that makes you exceptional and makes the beliefs exceptional such that we can escape the mundane world through this belief system. So in a lot of ways, like people will ask sometimes, well, under the schematic, would things like Catholicism or what separates religion from a cult and so forth. And in reality, these lines are not very clean, but I think what it comes down to is the belief system is not, it can take lots of different forms. It's how it's being used that I think is what matters.
Yeah, I just saw recently that the Catholic Church more people have joined the Catholic Church, the largest increase in history, which, I mean, for Catholics, that's amazing, and
Right.
but I see a lot of times I hear about the Christianity, I'm seeing declines. What is because again, I grew up in the Midwest, the Bible Belt, and I believe in Christianity, but also I've seen so much Christianity being used as a weapon.
Sure.
And so I look at some of these people, I'm like, you're so intelligent, you're so like independent people, but so many still fall into this highly controlled groups. How does that happen? When I'm just kind of, I feel like an average student.
Sure.
And I'm like, I can see the truth, but why do so many highly intelligent and independent people do this?
Well, I think there's a couple things to say about that. One is, so in my case, I was raised in the Mormon church. So in a lot of ways, children can find themselves put in these situations without even really recognizing it. So there's that aspect to it. But as far as like the full-fledged adults go, like how does an intelligent person find themselves in these situations? I think the answer to that is it's because we're all vulnerable to this. It's not that one person or, for instance, earlier today, the reporter asked me, well, are there psychological hallmarks that you would look for in the average cult member? Like, are there things that you're predisposed in some way to be a cult member? And I don't think that's the case. I think that human beings by nature have two things that are warring inside of us. This is the politics aspect. This is why a political philosopher like me would be curious about this. But I think we have the side of us that wants to be free. We want to make our own decisions. We want to live our lives independently of others. And I like to feel like I've earned the things that I've got. But then there's the other part of us that craves safety. We want to go back to the womb. We want someone to tell us the answers. I just, this last week, and there had been an issue with my my basement, and I had this moment where I looked around and I was like, where is dad right now?
Right.
And the reality is that I'm dad, right? There's no one else to do this but me. And so I think every person has within us this desire to say, somebody give me the answer. Somebody tell me the truth. Help me solve this so I don't have to. And that natural tendency to socialize can be very easily manipulated by a cult and weaponized by any belief system. So I think it's not a function of intelligence. It's not a function of mental illness. It's really like it's preying on the mundaneness of life.
Right.
The fact that we hit this moment in our 30s and 40s where we go, is this really all there is? Is it paying bills? Is it going to
Hmm.
work? Is it doing these things? And belief systems give us meaning in a way that other institutions do not. Now, that's probably benign in most cases. For the average religious person, having a belief system that gives you meaning is no big deal. It's when you marry it with those systems of control and systems of influence
Right.
and a charismatic leader that now you're creating factors that lead to the cult environment.
I I think I'm going to be 57 this year, so I've seen a few presidents and leaders in other countries. There's a lot of people that in politics or organizational leaders that they say the same thing. It's just some people seem to, for some reason, it sticks better than others. So is it more about the leader or is it just the emotional needs of the followers at that time?
That's a really great question. So, unpacking what we mean by charismatic leadership is really important because too often when you and I think of the word charisma, we're thinking I'm a D&D player, so I automatically think of like, the sixth, trait that you'd have, the
Right.
ability score that you have. But charisma doesn't mean just being popular or having a strong personality or being able to
Right.
capture the room. That's half of it. The social aspect of charisma is where an audience basically says, okay, this person is important and they must matter. There is an exceptionalism to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the key word is exceptionalism. The audience members, the listeners say, okay, this person has something unique that can offer to me, and I have to give them my full attention. Now, why is it that one politician can do that over another? I think it's a host of factors. One is I do think the personality dynamic is important. I think cult leaders possess a narcissisticness that I think most average humans do not.
Mm-hmm.
That ability not to feel shame and not to feel any kind of accountability for one's actions or to see a connection between my leadership and the harm that's being done to my followers, that's
Mm-hmm.
a crucial piece for cult leaders to have. I also think too that the people that are listening have to be in a moment where they are experiencing a reaction to some trauma in their life.
Mm.
So that's where you could start saying there are some mental illness factors that would go with this. So it could be a very intense trauma from the past, sexual trauma, physical trauma,
Right.
but it could also just be I'm in a very economically insecure moment in my life,
Right.
and I don't feel like there's a future for me. I'm afraid of what AI will do to my
Mm.
job or something like that. And if a person comes along with a message that sounds like, it's not your fault, it isn't your problem, it's the system's problem, it's everybody else's problem, and I have the answers to solve it for you to make everything better again. I think it takes both of those things at the same time, the delivery as well as the recipient actually receiving the message. And then once it's there, once you're committed to it, then it kind of reinforces itself. You don't have to keep perpetuating it.
Well, that kind of leads to looking back to some of the figures of people that in my lifetime, your lifetime, and even before, like Jim Jones,
Mhm.
David Koresh, Charles Manson. Um, what are some of these psychological patterns do they share? And can some of these leaders kind of see? I mean, if you look back to even Hitler,
Yeah.
I would say that was a cult just because so
Oh,
many.
absolutely.
Yeah, but do do people actually kind of idolize and worship these people today and use the same tactics?
I think they do. I think it's honestly not any harder than this person forms a circle around them. And this is where the systems of influence come into play. So
Mm,
a cult leader that's really going to be effective, cannot do it alone. The cult leader needs an inner circle. They
right.
need middle management to basically reinforce the message. Those people have to be committed to the belief. So they have to be committed to the idea that the leader is exceptional. So let's take Hitler as an example here. Rudolf Hess was basically a lapdog
Mm,
to Adolf Hitler. Hess was a very unexceptional human being, couldn't make it in the normal German soldierly class, and so he associated with Hitler because he felt like his future could ride on that. Same with Goebbels. less so with Himmler, but a lot of his inner circle were people who thought this guy is going to be my ticket to success.
Right.
And they also deeply believed in National Socialism. So the kind of thing that Hitler was preaching, that resonated with them.
Hmm.
So then they became the middle managers that reinforced the message, you should listen to this guy. We listen to him. You should hear him out too. Um, so looking at like Manson, for example, Manson relied very heavily on the family to make sure that
Right.
that would promote his views. Heaven's Gate is another example of this. Bonnie Nettles was the original cult founder, but she needed Marshall Applewhite to help make the cult solidified. David Koresh needed his middle managers, the people who ultimately said, yep, you are Jesus, some of whom are still out there and who still believe that he was Jesus, many of them women, to basically reinforce that message. So there's plenty of people out there who are narcissists and who are charismatic individuals who don't have a cult following because they haven't managed to convince that inner circle. And I think that's a key step on the road to cult leaderdom.
Now, I, I mean, if you look back in history, there's not too many cult leaders that survive. It's almost like the Roman Empire. Eventually,
Sure.
it collapses, and
Yeah.
a lot of it's to do with power and greed. And so, what are some of these leaders? What does happen, and when do the people start going, wait a minute, this doesn't seem right?
So I often say to people that we only ever hear about the unsuccessful cult leaders,
Right,
right?
right.
There are probably successful cult leaders out there that we are just not even aware of because they're doing such a good job of flying under the radar. I'll give you an example of a church in Mexico, La Luz del Mundo, which you may have heard in the news a
Hmm.
couple years ago. It was a big sex trafficking
Right.
criminal investigation that happened in Southern California. It's Christianity repackaged in a different form. Well, the original founder of the organization, dating all the way back to the 1940s, he followed a playbook that was cautious. He was very safe about the way he did things. So when he was trafficking girls that were under the age of, 10, 8, that sort of thing, he focused on the poverty stricken. He focused on families that were isolated.
Hmm.
He focused on kids that were unlikely to be able to report this to their families. And so he preyed on individuals that he knew were not going to be able to use information to get this out into the public. When he died, his son took over, and his son was much sloppier. His son thought, well, I'm going to scale this up. Why not? Instead of focusing on the poor inner city Mexico kid, let's start preying on the San Diego teenager who's got a cell phone. And it's at those moments, it's when you start to get the hubris to think that you start to drink your own Kool-Aid, to use the Jim Jones analogy, that's when things start to fall apart. I told an audience a few nights ago that cults fall apart the minute that sex, drugs, and money start to become the centerpiece. And that's because that's when we start to notice. That's when the public starts to notice. That's when criminal laws start to kick in. So I think cult leaders sometimes, the bad ones anyway, the ones that are ineffective, fail to see that there is a limit to their power. They really do start to believe that they are untouchable. The ones that maintain throughout their leadership that they are reliant upon their middle management, those are the ones that tend to perpetuate for a while. And I think too, if they start to shift to like a corporate structure where there are now laws that will help perpetuate the cult beyond just the leader, those are also the effective cults because then they can corporatize what they've been doing.
Do you feel like you said, and if I'm overstepping, please let me know. But even as a Mormon,
Yeah, no, we can talk about it. Let's do it.
as a Mormon, because if you come from a Christian aspect and maybe other people outside of the Mormon, they would consider that a cult.
Yeah. When I was a missionary for the Mormon Church when I was 19, I rode around Southeast Texas in Houston in the heat of summer in a white shirt and tie, wore the black name tag, and being around a lot of evangelicals, I was given the word cult all the time. In fact, that was partially
Yeah.
why I'm interested in this word today, is because of the background that I experienced. Now, at the time, I would have told you, because I was a committed Mormon, this is not a cult because, Joseph Smith's gone. We don't worship Joseph Smith. We worship Jesus. And that would have been my justification.
Right.
Now, in my later years, as I've separated from the Mormon church and as I have questioned my own beliefs and done the very hard work of going through a faith crisis, once I encountered this definition of cult, this specific one, the scholarly one, and not the one I heard at Thanksgiving or at the doors that I knocked on into Texas, I realized actually the word cult has a specific definition and it's okay to apply it. It's okay to just say it. So I do actually, I'm full throated when I say today that I believe that the mainstream Mormon church in Salt Lake is a cult.
Hmm.
Yeah, they're going through a process right now of decultifying, and there may come a time when, like the Catholic Church, it becomes more mainstream and more
Right.
acceptable, and maybe they will get to that place. But at least based on my upbringing in Southeast Idaho, in a very rural community where Mormonism was the hegemonic belief, it was definitely still culty.
Yeah. I think a lot of religions or organizations probably wouldn't like me much because I've always been a why person. And I
Sure.
think that's why I named my podcast Truth Be Told many years ago, just because I asked too many questions. I remember going through my 20s, I would go to different Christian churches. I would go to Buddhist temples. I just was curious about religions. And when I felt welcomed,
Hmm.
I stayed and listened. But as
Sure.
soon as I heard that church across the street is the devil, or anything, or another religion was, they're the Jews are going to hell, I just was like, that's a big turnoff for me.
Yeah.
So I never really gave them a second chance, mostly. So with people like me, I think that's why I was thinking, why me, where I can see what's going on, and that's when so many other people are falling for this, and even people that grew up in my own household
Hmm.
would
Sure.
fall for this. So for somebody like you that did see the light,
Right.
how does one maintain, like the Mormon Church maintain, where so many others that don't, without collapsing?
It's a good question. Why is it that some cults survive and some don't, really? And,
Yeah.
for if you look at the time period in which, well, let's just keep talking about Mormonism. If you look at the time period in which Mormonism was founded, it was not an unusual religion.
Mm.
It certainly had unusual beliefs, but most of New England at the time and parts of the upper Midwest were going through a period of the Second Great Awakening,
Hmm. Right.
is the phrase from history, where people were trying to do what was called restoration movements. They were looking for not a reformation that had been, let's change these aspects of the Catholic Church, but let's bring back the original church. Let's find the original thing that was lost, whatever that looks like. So, Church of Christ is a good example of that.
Right.
There are offshoots of the Assemblies of God that stem from that particular faith tradition. And so Mormonism wasn't really unique in that way. Joseph Smith was just saying, "I'm restoring what was lost." What made him unique, though, I think, was his martyrdom, murder, if you want to use a different word for it. But his killing in the 1840s, I think, is what sealed the deal for Mormonism.
Hmm.
There was a schism that certainly took place. And there are offshoots of Mormondom that are still out there, but the one that stuck was the Brighamite branch that made it to Salt Lake. And I think it was the crisis of Joseph Smith dying and Brigham Young seizing the opportunity to take up the mantle of Joseph Smith's charisma that made it work. And now today, like I was mentioning with the corporatization of cults, the Mormon Church operates like an organization, like any corporation that we'd encounter. So they can kind of hide behind multiple layers of law to seem like a pretty benign corporate-facing institution while still keeping all the beliefs, while still keeping all the leadership, and they're borrowing Joseph Smith's leadership to reinforce the beliefs. Um, so the phrase we'd use in the literature would be something called charisma by proxy, where basically the current prophet, Dallin Oaks, says, if you believe Joseph Smith was a prophet, you would believe I am too, because I am, next in line in terms of the leadership. So I think it's those historical traditions and the patterns that build over time and then that slowly insulate the leadership from any kind of criticism that ensures that a religion continues to survive. Scientology is another example of this.
Yeah. I've talked about that many times.
Sure. Yeah.
So tell me about Scientology, because, I mean, if you just do the research, L. Ron Hubbard, I think he was, wasn't he like a fiction or fiction writer, right?
He was a sci-fi writer.
Yeah, sci-fi writer.
Couldn't really hack it as a sci-fi writer.
Right, right. But, he pretty much said, if you want to be, I've heard this before, if you want to be famous, or not famous, if you want to be rich, or start a religion.
Right. Right.
And I think that's kind of what happened with him. And he, a lot of sex was involved, and the mystery, and now you're hearing so many people coming out of it saying, don't do it. But yet people still do it. And there's still people like Tom Cruise and all these people John Travolta. And when Kirstie Alley was alive, she was part of it. And when I hear so many other people, I'm like, really? What? It shocks you. So again, when you hear so much negative towards something like Scientology, why do people even give it a chance?
I think there's a couple things that go on, like with Scientology or with Mormonism. And then keep in mind, these are two very different faiths. Like Scientology will absolutely retaliate against you.
Exactly.
Mormons will be a little softer about it. But so I think there's a couple things that happen. One is early successes reinforce belief. So in Tom Cruise's case, or John Travolta's case, the networking that came from being a part of Scientology was just liquid gold to them, right? And tying their success and their stardom to the belief just reinforced that the belief was true, right? It was proof that they were on the right path. Or take like Mormonism, for instance. A lot of Mormon men are very successful because they pursue degrees in accounting and business and so forth, and they tap into the Mormon network to make that happen.
Right.
That's proof that you're on the right path. So that, I think, those early successes reinforce that. I think the other thing that's crucial to this is the silencing of dissent. So we've been talking a lot about how you and I would see this because we have all the information in front of us. Right. We can go do the research. The internet has been a boon for that in terms of our ability to find answers. But it's surprising how well cults still today can isolate a person, even in a world where we have so much information. And that isolation doesn't have to be physical. I grew up in a very isolated Mormon community in Idaho, but it doesn't have to be you're in the middle of nowhere. The way that algorithmic technology works today, and the fact that you're going to constantly be reinforcing your interests on like Instagram or whatever the platform is, and the fact that the church will assign a list of things that you're just not allowed to read, that this is anti-Mormon literature or anti-Scientology literature, and slapping that stigma on it makes it into something that's untouchable. And again, you're preying off the fear. You're preying off the part of the person that says, well, so far this thing has answered my questions. I don't want to upset the apple cart, so I won't look. My dad, who is no longer Mormon, but who was still a committed Mormon when I was growing up, I oftentimes asked the deeper questions too. And a phrase that oftentimes came up in our house was, don't delve into the mysteries. Don't dig deeper than you need to.
That's the fun part.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's where I thought the magic was. And I felt a tension in that too, where I was taught to be very curious, believer in God. And at the same time, there's just some questions we're not allowed to ask. And so I think that over time, that reinforcement of this is off the table, this is a taboo topic, that's a surefire way to keep people inside. So this is a lesson for people. If you have someone who is in your life who you do suspect is in a cult, or you yourself are in a cult, one of the first things to do is to have an information overload, is to just access anything, even if it's stuff that you feel okay, this is off topic. Take a look and really interrogate it. Now, that alone won't do it, but it
Right.
will certainly be a step in the right direction.
I think now that we are in an age, because like I said, when I was in the 90s, in my early to mid to late 20s, I had to go out and look for it. Like going
Yeah.
to the churches, going to Buddha. I didn't have the internet. I didn't have my phone to tell me, Chat GPT to tell me exactly
Right.
who and what things are. Now we have, okay, I have Facebook groups. I have, Fox News. I have CNN. I have everything I need that I know where I go. It's going to tell me what I want to hear. And that's why I like doing what I do, because I hear so many different points of view. Some I agree, some I don't agree. And I think that's healthy,
Yeah.
is having conversations where now I'm in a group, all I do all day long, I hear what I want to hear. I comment, you got it, I agree with you. How do we break that cycle with it's constantly 24/7?
That is such a good question, because it is, I think, the question of our era, and it's
Yeah.
one that I think not just we, but all the generations that are coming after us are going to have to answer. I'm an elder millennial. I have Gen Z students, and I have a Gen Alpha son. So the burden is going to be on these generations to kind of deal with this question.
Yeah.
But I think where it starts, first off, is I think we do have access to lots of information. It's absolutely the case that right now we're walking around with more than all of the books of the Library of Alexandria in our pocket at any given moment. I think the key is that we need to be, so civil dialogue, the ability to have discourse, there's nothing magical about it, really. At the end of the day, what we're doing is we're just doing education. This is why, for me, cults are a political topic, because in our democracies, in order for a liberal democracy to thrive, there is an assumption that citizens are going to be paying attention, they're going to care about topics, and they're going to want to shape public policy. The only way you can do that is dialoguing with a fellow citizen. The reality is we all have to live in the same country, and we have to, politics is about compromise. It just is. And for both cults as well as political people, inside a family, whatever walk of life you may be in, encountering someone of differing beliefs is the key to, I think, being a full-fledged mature adult. Yeah. It doesn't mean you have to agree. You do not have to accept another person's argument, but listening to them and really listening, not just hearing them, but actually parroting back what they hear, restating what they're saying, and trying to understand, even if you find it repugnant, I think is crucial. I've sat down across the table from neo-Nazis. I've sat down across the table from, the hardcore postmodern activists, and I may not agree with all of them, but I can sit down and at least try to understand their perspective. Yeah. And it's interesting how that deflates the energy in the room, right? It makes it less like we're in separate camps and we're just talking.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because I have, when I go back to Kansas and other parts of the country, you hear both sides, and some get pretty heated. I usually just say, calm down. We can have a conversation. Or, I don't think this is a conversation we should have. Let's just be civil and family or friends, whatever. And mostly that works. But, because for me, it's like somebody's belief system. That's the good thing about being in America. We can talk about and believe whatever we want to believe, and it's okay. That's but some people are hardcore, and they want to just like regurgitate hatred or beliefs or whatever, and I think it's I don't know, is that healthy? I mean, to just, because I think have a civil conversation is great, but just to to expose every hatred they have for whatever group or political system there is.
I think that what we experience a lot today, and this is the topic of my book, that I think most of, especially around the topic of religion, but I would also include politics in here too.
Right.
that most of the discourse in both of those areas is dominated by a very, very loud minority of people that are divided around a host of issues. So take politics. Most of the discourse is dominated by a handful of elites that are very
Right.
passionate about their beliefs, and then
Mm-hmm.
they've mobilized social media and other forms of media to kind of elevate their platforms. I actually think that most Americans, and I think there is data to support this, most Americans are pretty passive in their beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Like they do care when it comes down to, how will this policy be instituted? But as far as things like our most cherished beliefs, free speech,
Mm-hmm.
the right of people to be able to practice religions, even tax policy, those sorts of things, there's a surprising amount of agreement on a host of topics. And I think what ends up happening is though that silent majority of people who are mostly pretty passive about the way others believe gets drowned out by this loud, vociferous group of zealots, whether political zealots or religious zealots, who have defined the conversation for us. And so I think for those of us that see conversations as being a way of life, and those of us that are not necessarily willing to die for our beliefs and throw ourselves into flames in the name of them, I think what we have to do is reassert ourselves in the conversation and say, actually, we're not going to be dominated by the zealots. We're going to push back and we're going to say, actually, we care about the relationships we have, even if we do disagree, and we'll
Mm-hmm.
keep fighting for that. And the good news is, I actually think that I watch a lot of my Gen Z students, and I think they're starting to awaken to this.
That's
Maybe it's
great.
just because I'm in Wisconsin, I'm around a bunch of nice Midwesterners.
Right.
But I do get the sense that my Gen Z students are starting to say, I don't know if I want to fall victim to the same cycle that perhaps older generations might have done.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that they're doing that is they're doing what are called grandma hobbies. They're sitting down and they're doing knitting, they're crocheting
I have
together,
seen more of
they're
that.
yeah, and there's a lot of like book clubs that are happening. And I
Yeah.
think that's great. I think that's exactly how you bring these passionate, sometimes very abstract concepts down into real world where you see a physical person that you can actually get to know on an individual basis.
When I hear saying, "Oh, we need to go back to the good old days," well, some people that wasn't the good old days.
It
So
wasn't.
yeah, so we can't really say that. Maybe that's what you think of.
Sure.
I remember growing up in a small town. Yeah, there was some great. I grew up around all white people. I grew up around us. Pretty much the whole town was my family, or half,
Right.
because it's like 300 people.
Sure.
3/4 are my family. So yes, there are good times. I remember good times, but there was a lot of negative stuff too that I saw that I did not believe in.
Yeah.
And so I love that you mentioned your book, and I'd like to highlight that a little bit, so people can pick it up on Amazon or go to his website. I think I got the website wrong. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, it's all good. It's just
Yeah.
adamkuntz.com.
But as you can see, it's called To Hell with Heaven. And I kind of one thing that kind of stood out that I saw a little synopsis of it was whether religion is actually still has practical relevance in today. And I kind of agree with you, or I don't know your thoughts on it, but I feel like sometimes religion, the religion, again, it just feels like so many people have died, so many wars and battles, and people have died just because of somebody else's belief system.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it is hard for me to say the term religion, should it be even in today's society?
So this is getting into an even deeper question, but yeah, I think that so too often I think religion has been mobilized in the past in political dimensions, and the lines between religion and politics have never been clean. I think that a lot of the times political movements or political issues are actually just religious ones masked. So let's think about it like this. There's a lot of hard questions about our existence that we just don't have the answers to.
True.
I don't know if we are alone in the universe. I cannot say one way or the other.
Right.
I don't know what happens when I die. My son asked us that a couple months ago, and I told him the honest answer. I said, I don't know, and I don't think anyone else does either. So let's not worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that religion today takes a couple different forms, at least in the United States. I think for some people, it's just this is what we've always done, right? I'm Catholic and I go to church on Easter and I go to
Mm-hmm.
church on Christmas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, for my Lutheran neighbors that live behind me, they're a little more conservative than I am, but we have a great relationship. They're like a grandma figure to my kid. And that's because for them, religion is just one aspect of their lives, and it's tied up with it's not necessarily nested with everything that they do.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is, I think in a lot of ways, religion in our day has sometimes been mobilized to be a totalitarian worldview where it answers everything.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the most pernicious religions in the world are the ones that say, we don't just have answers to those hard metaphysical questions, we have answers to everything, everything all the way down, right down to what you should do for your career and the person that you should marry. Those are the religions I think that we should be suspicious of. And I think that the fear I have as a person who studies politics and looks at the Constitution
Right.
is that we're increasingly creating accommodations for people to say, well, I don't have to follow the rules that everybody else is doing because I've got this unique belief system that tells me I get to do something else.
Hmm.
Well, we have to ask ourselves as a nation, as a community, at what point does that end? Certainly, I could say, if you're praying on a football field, I guess I'm fine with accommodating that belief. But what happens when it's the next thing? In my book, I
Right.
talk about Matthew Taylor Coleman, who killed his two kids because he was believing a very hyper conspiracy theory Christian idea that his children were going to become demons. He was praying, he was falling victim to delusions. And at the end of the day, he sacrificed his kids for the good of humanity because he thought he was doing what was
Right.
right. Well, how is that ever any different from the story of Abraham attempting to sacrifice Isaac or Ishmael, depending on your tradition? At the end of the day, it's a father slaying a child in the name of God. I would hope that our nation and our Constitution does not give that kind of accommodation, that we would draw the line there. But I have yet to see, at least from the present court and from our current the last 50 years of jurisprudence, I've yet to see them draw a very clean line to say, actually, this is the point where you can't do something in the name of God.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, I don't even really use Christianity for myself anymore. I say a Christ follower because I
Sure,
loved
I think
his
that's
teaching.
great.
I loved his teachings. I loved what he meant, what he said, and how, just to treat other people. I love that. That's what I love. But I don't. I'm not. When somebody tells me that I'm going to hell for this, or I'm, because I always said, well, God gave us free will, but I
Hmm.
have a human telling me how I'm supposed to live. I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah,
It just,
it's hard to reconcile both the fact that we have our agency to decide,
right,
and then at the same time, there's got to be an authority figure over me telling me this is the way to live.
right. So for me, that's one of the big questions I've had since I was very young, and I thought this question of culthood or cultish, how it's like you said, it's from the beginning of time. I think there's been some type of a cult that has survived or has flourished on this earth. So, and before we get out of here, I do want to ask you that, you know, it, I I feel like there's a lot of fear, especially right now, and fear plays such a huge role in keeping people in a controlled system.
Mhm.
Can you maybe try to give us some advice on breaking the fear, breaking that
Absolutely.
cycle, and so we can start thinking again for ourselves?
Yeah. I think there are no easy answers to this, but I think one really important thing to remember is that humanity has shown over its existence a surprising ability to survive. We are a wonderfully adaptable species that has been able to flourish in a way that no other member of the animal kingdom
True.
has.
Right.
And that should give us a lot of optimism. I also think too that the future has always been uncertain. There's always been technological disruptions. There have always been geopolitical problems that upend the old orders that we thought were taken for granted. I think where people do best is when they find their local community and they
Mm,
make individual connections. I think, and the
yeah.
phrase that I hear all the time is go out and touch grass, but maybe it's something like that. It's something like being able to go find the people that are close to you,
Yeah.
building a neighborhood. When I was a Mormon, I had a prepackaged community. I moved all over the country for different things, for school, for jobs, and so forth. And wherever we moved, Mormonism was my community. I knew I had friends because all I had to do was look up the Mormon church. But those friendships were very artificial. They were all transactional. It was just because we happened to be in the same church. We really didn't
Mm,
have that much in common. Here in Wisconsin and a little bit in California when I was a grad student, those were the first times in my life I had to make genuine friendships where I actually had to build a community.
wow.
And I will be honest with you, it's been way more fun to do it that
Yeah.
way. To go and see my kids, fellow parents at the school my
Hmm.
kid goes to, or to have a block party with my neighbors. And I think the little beacon of hope that I feel like we need to have in this is to reach out to your individual communities. That's how you avoid falling into cults in the first place, because you have a support network, you have people that you know love you and care for you no matter what. And it also, I think, helps us remember that we all are in this together. You're not alone doom scrolling in a room somewhere. You have
Hmm.
friends. You just have to reach out and find them.
Amen to that. But I really appreciate you, and I hope people go to your website, Adam Kunz, and that's KUNZ.com, and Adam with one D.
That's
So,
right.
yeah,
That's right.
because otherwise you might get some other website. But
You
pick up the
never know
book,
what
To
to get.
Hell with Heaven, and I appreciate you for coming in on this Good Friday and
Of course.
sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us. And I hope people take this, some, I'm going to say with a grain of salt, but also with an open mind, because I
That's
think
right.
that's where we begin. Just because your belief system doesn't mean you're in a cult, but think for yourself.
Absolutely.
That's what I'm taking away from what you're saying. Think for yourself and do the research. You don't have to go to check some other site out that you don't always go
That's right.
to. Watch another channel. Watch some documentaries that maybe you wouldn't, because that's what I do. I watch tons of documentaries.
Oh, yeah.
But Dr. Kunz is definitely a person that you could reach out to and read his book, and maybe reach out to him and if you have questions. So, do you have an
Absolutely.
Instagram?
I do have Instagram. I'm on Instagram as the Apatheist, which
Ooh.
is kind of a fun title. I'm also on TikTok, so it's TheApatheist. But you can also just search Adam Kuntz. I would also say to any members of the audience that are listening, if you are a person that needs this kind of support, if you just have questions, reach out to me anytime. My university email is public. You can email me there. I would also encourage people to visit the Lawlich Center for Cults and
Yeah,
Coercion. I'm a board member on that, and we are always looking for ways to help cult survivors. And if you're a therapist or a lawyer who's encountering these issues, hit us up anytime, and we will help you out as much as we can.
perfect. Well, thank you again, and thank you for your time. I definitely will probably be reaching out to you in the future again, because
Yeah,
there's this topic is not going away.
no.
So, and we hope it does. We hope at least shrinks, but I have a feeling it's going to be around quite a bit longer. So,
Well, maybe we'll have good things to talk about the next time. Who knows?
amen. Yes, love it. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Adam, and thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We appreciate you. Please support Dr. Adam Kunz at adamkunz.com. And thank you for supporting Truth Be Told. Share, like, and leave a comment. Many of these topics come up because people like you share them with me, and then I want to get somebody on to give you more knowledge, and I'm learning more. I always say I'm just a man on the street learning from your your questions and your suggestions. So, but until next time, take care of yourself and each other, and happy Easter and Passover and Good Friday and all that good stuff. All right, take care. We'll see you next week.